I never intended to find them. After 57 years of marriage, I thought my mother had shared all her secrets with me before she passed away 3 months ago at the age of 92. But as I sorted through the remnants of her life in the small Victorian house where I grew up, the attic revealed a story she'd kept hidden her entire life. The discovery happened on a sweltering August afternoon. At 68, I wasn't as nimble climbing into the attic as I once had been, but the task of clearing out Mom's house couldn't be delayed any longer. My daughter Rebecca was helping me downstairs, sorting through Mom's extensive collection of books, while I tackled the mysterious boxes that had been gathering dust overhead for decades. The attic was stifling, sunlight streaming through the small round window and illuminating dancing dust particles. Cardboard boxes labeled in Mom's neat handwriting contained the expected treasures: my childhood drawings, Dad's military medals, photo albums documenting family vacations and holiday gatherings. I worked methodically, sorting items into piles to keep, donate, or discard. It was when I moved an old steamer trunk that I noticed the floorboard beneath it was slightly askew. I might never have spotted it if the afternoon sun hadn't cast just the right shadow. Curious, I pried up the loose board and discovered a small space containing a bundle wrapped in faded blue fabric and tied with twine. My fingers trembled slightly as I unwrapped the package. Inside was a collection of letters, their envelopes yellowed with age, and a small, leather-bound journal. The letters were addressed to my mother, Margaret Sullivan, but the name on the return address made my heart stutter. James Donovan. Not my father, Thomas Sullivan, but a man I'd never heard of. The postmarks dated from 1949 to 1951. Just before my mother married my father. With a sense of trespassing into territory not meant for me, I opened the first letter. My dearest Margaret, the Arizona sunset tonight reminded me of your hair, all copper and gold and impossible beauty. 4 months into this deployment, and I still reach for you in my sleep. The guys tease me about the way I guard your letters, but they're my lifeline out here. Maggie girl, every word you write keeps me going for another day. The heat is brutal, but I don't mind it. Desert heat is honest, straightforward, unlike the sticky Virginia summers we used to complain about. Remember that 4th of July when we snuck away from your parents' barbecue and went swimming in Miller's Pond? You wore that blue dress that matched your eyes, and I knew then that someday you'd be my wife. Keep those home fires burning. Sweetheart, another 8 months and I'll be home to make good on all my promises. All my love, James. I sat back against the trunk, my mother's hidden past unfolding before me. I'd always believed my parents' courtship had been straightforward. They met after Dad returned from his Korean War service, fell in love, and married within a year. There had never been any mention of a James Donovan, of copper sunsets, or promises made. I picked up the journal next, opening to the first page where my mother's familiar handwriting filled the cream-colored paper. April 12th, 1949, James shipped out today. The platform at the train station was crowded with so many young men in uniform, so many tearful goodbyes. I promised myself I wouldn't cry, but when the train began to pull away, I couldn't help it. 2 years seems an eternity. Mother says it will pass quickly if I keep busy, but I don't see how time can move at all when half my heart has gone to Arizona. He proposed last night under the oak tree in the park. No ring yet. He says he'll buy one with his first sergeant's pay. I don't care about a ring. I just want him home safe. The journal continued, chronicling their long-distance romance through letters, my mother's nursing studies, her hopes and plans for their future together. I read entry after entry, feeling like an intruder, but unable to stop. Then, in November 1950, the tone changed abruptly. November 18th, 1950. No letter from James for 3 weeks now. Mrs. Harrison at the post office assures me there have been delays with military mail, but I can't shake this feeling of dread. Last night I dreamed he was trying to reach me from across a wide river, calling my name, but the current kept pulling him further away. Mother says I'm being dramatic, that I should focus on my studies instead of waiting by the mailbox. But how can I concentrate on anything when every knock at the door might be news of him? The next entry was dated December 3rd, 1950. The handwriting noticeably less controlled, the ink blotched in places. His commanding officer's letter arrived today. James was shot down over mountains near the base. Search parties found the wreckage, but no survivors. They're listing him as killed in action. How am I supposed to go on breathing when James isn't breathing anymore? How can the sun still rise and set? How can people on the street still laugh and go about their business? Don't they know the world has ended? Mother says I must be strong, that life continues. Father says time will heal, but they don't understand. No one understands. The remaining journal entries documented my mother's grief, raw, devastating, all-consuming. Then, in March 1951, a new name appeared, Thomas Sullivan, my father. March 15th, 1951, Mother insisted I attend the Hendersons' dinner party. I didn't want to go, didn't see the point in socializing when all I can think about is James. But Thomas Sullivan was there, just back from Korea himself. He noticed I wasn't eating and brought me a glass of water instead of champagne. Sometimes the simplest things help the most, he said. He has kind eyes. Sad eyes that seem to understand loss without my having to explain it. Over the following months, the journal tracked their developing friendship. My father, patient and gentle, never pushing, simply being present as my mother slowly emerged from her grief. By September, their relationship had deepened. September 29th, 1951. Thomas asked me to marry him today. I care for him deeply, his steadiness, his quiet strength. He knows about James, knows I'm still healing. I don't expect to replace him, Thomas said, but I think we could build something good together. I'm not the starry-eyed girl who kissed James goodbye at the train station. That girl died with him. But perhaps this older, sadder version of me can find happiness with Thomas. Perhaps that's what James would want for me. I said yes. The final journal entry was dated the night before my parents' wedding in December 1951. December 14th, 1951. My wedding day tomorrow. Mother has been fussing over every detail, but all I can think about is the small blue suitcase tucked under my bed. James's letters, this journal, the pressed flowers from our last picnic, the sketch he drew of us, growing old together on a porch somewhere. Thomas is a good man who deserves a wife who comes to him whole, not in pieces. For his sake, for our future, I'm putting away these remnants of James. After tomorrow, Margaret Donovan, the woman I might have been, will exist only in these pages. Margaret Sullivan will step forward, grateful for second chances and determined to be worthy of them. Forgive me, James, and thank you, Thomas, for loving what was left of me. I closed the journal, tears streaming down my face. My mother, the practical, no-nonsense woman who'd raised me with such steady devotion, had carried this profound loss inside her all those years without ever speaking of it. And my father, had he known how deeply she had loved before him? Had he understood that he was her second choice, her path to healing rather than her heart's first desire? The questions tumbled through my mind as I carefully rewrapped the letters and journal. "Mom, you okay up there?" Rebecca called from the bottom of the attic stairs. "Fine, honey," I called back, quickly wiping my tears. "Just found some old photos." That night, after Rebecca had gone back to her family, I sat alone in my mother's kitchen with the bundle of letters spread before me. I'd brought them down from their hiding place, unable to return them to the darkness. Now I hesitated. Should I read them all? Should I tell my own children about the man who nearly became their grandfather? Or should I honor my mother's decision to keep this chapter of her life private? I picked up another letter, this one from April 1950. "My dearest Margaret, the wildflowers are blooming across the base, determined little things pushing up through the dry earth. They remind me of you, beauty that persists against all odds. Some of the men get packages from home with cookies or tobacco or magazines, but your letters are worth more than any of those things to me. Emission runs are increasingly dangerous, but don't worry about me. I have too much to live for, too many promises to keep. Our little house with the garden you've described, the children with your eyes and my stubborn chin, God help them. Sunday mornings, reading the paper together while the coffee percolates. Sometimes I close my eyes and I can smell your perfume. Lilacs, isn't it? I found a small bottle of something similar in town last weekend and bought it just to have that scent with me. The guys really teased me about that one, but I don't care. 6 more months, Maggie girl. Keep counting down with me. All my heart, James." I read letter after letter, witnessing their love story unfold through James's words, his dreams for their future, inside jokes I couldn't fully understand, references to shared memories from before his deployment. His voice was vivid and warm, full of humor and tenderness. In his last letter, dated just days before his death, he wrote about the ring he'd finally saved enough to buy, how he planned to formally propose again when he returned, even though they'd already decided to marry. "Oh, Mom," I whispered to the empty kitchen, "why didn't you ever tell me?" The next day, I did something impulsive. With the bundle of letters beside me, I searched online for James Donovan, pilot, Arizona, 1950. To my surprise, several results appeared. A military archive listing, a memorial page for servicemen lost during training missions, and most intriguingly, a news article from 2010 about the discovery of a crashed training aircraft in the mountains of Arizona, 60 years after it went missing. My heart racing, I clicked on the article. It described how hikers had stumbled upon the wreckage of a T-6 Texan trainer aircraft that had disappeared during a routine exercise in December 1950. The remains of the pilot had been recovered and identified through military records and DNA as First Lieutenant James Donovan, age 24, of Richmond, Virginia. The article mentioned that efforts to locate Donovan's next of kin had been unsuccessful, as his parents were deceased and he had no siblings. His remains had been interred with military honors at Arlington National Cemetery. I stared at the screen, my mind whirling. My mother must have seen this news, must have known they found James's body. The article was published 12 years ago, when she had been 80. Had she gone to the funeral? Had she finally had a chance to say goodbye properly? I scrolled down to the comments section, not expecting to find anything relevant, but a single comment caught my eye. Margaret S., December 12, 2010. "Thank you for bringing him home. I've been waiting 60 years to know where he rests." The blue-eyed girl from the train station never forgot. My hands trembled as I closed the laptop. She had seen it. She had acknowledged him publicly, if anonymously, and yet she'd never spoken a word of it to me or anyone else in the family. I spent the next week finishing the task of clearing out my mother's house, my thoughts constantly returning to James and the love story that had been buried beneath decades of my family's history. The more I learned about him through his letters, the more I understood what my mother had lost, and what a remarkable man my father had been, to love her knowing her heart had been shattered. Finally, on my last day in the house, I made a decision. I gathered the letters and journal and drove to the cemetery where both my parents were buried. My father had passed away 8 years earlier, and now my mother rested beside him under a shared headstone inscribed with their names and the simple epitaph, "Together in Love." I sat on the grass between their graves, the bundle of letters in my lap. "I found them, Mom," I said softly. "James's letters, your journal." A gentle breeze rustled the leaves of the oak tree shading their graves. "I understand why you kept them hidden. You wanted to honor Dad, to give him your full presence in this life you built together." I touched the cool marble of my father's side of the headstone. "And Dad, I think you were even more extraordinary than I knew. To love someone that completely, knowing you weren't her first choice, her first love." I opened the journal to the final entry, rereading my mother's words about second chances and stepping forward as Margaret Sullivan. "You did build something good together," I continued. 61 years of marriage, 3 children, 7 grandchildren, 2 great-grandchildren. A beautiful life. And I don't think you betrayed James by finding happiness, Mom. From his letters, I think he would have wanted that for you. I sat in silence for a long moment, feeling the weight of these interconnected lives. James, whose future was cut short. My mother, who found the strength to love again. My father, who accepted a heart that had been broken and helped repair it. And me, the daughter who would never have existed if that plane hadn't crashed. If my mother hadn't attended the Hendersons' dinner party. If my father hadn't offered a simple glass of water instead of champagne. "I'm going to tell Rebecca and the others about James," I finally said. "Not to diminish what you and Dad shared, but because it's part of our family story. How love can be lost and found. How healing can come from unexpected places. How the heart's capacity for love isn't limited to just one person in a lifetime." As I rose to leave, I placed one letter on my mother's grave, the last one James had written, where he described the ring he'd bought and his dreams for their future. I kept the others, along with the journal, to share with my children and eventually my grandchildren. Walking back to my car, I felt a curious sense of peace. The discovery of my mother's first love hadn't diminished my understanding of my parents' marriage, but had instead deepened it, revealing layers of courage and compassion I hadn't fully appreciated before. My mother had loved 2 men in her lifetime, one with the passionate intensity of youth, cut tragically short, and one with the steadfast devotion that builds a family and weathers life's storms. Both loves were real. Both had shaped her, and through her, they had shaped me. That evening, I called Rebecca and asked her to gather her brothers for dinner the following weekend. "I have a story to tell you," I said, "about your grandmother, a man named James Donovan, and how sometimes the greatest love stories aren't the ones that end happily ever after, but the ones that teach us how to begin again." As I hung up the phone, I glanced at the framed photo on my mantel, my parents on their 50th wedding anniversary, their faces lined with age, but their eyes bright with shared memories. Between them was the love they'd built together, made more precious by the understanding that it had been a choice, day after day, year after year. A testament not to perfect romance, but to the enduring power of second chances and hearts resilient enough to love deeply, more than once,